What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the name Jeffrey Dahmer? Is it cannibalism, necrophilia, or murder? Well, Jeffrey Dahmer was all of those things. But did you know that he was also very intelligent? 1960, his parents named him after his father's favorite poet, English Romantic poet Geoffrey William. It is interesting to note that the famous serial killer's name was chosen by his father. He served for 2 years as a medic, which gave him access to human bodies. It is believed that he used this access to practice his cannibalistic urges. In 1979, Jeffrey Dahmer was discharged from the army with an honorable discharge. He then returned to his hometown of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where he began working as a night shift worker at a chocolate factory. There is no single answer to this question, as Jeffrey Dahmer was a very complex individual. If he hadn't been caught, who knows how many people he would have killed. His intelligence is one of the reasons why he was able to get away with his crimes for so long. Several women claimed to be his fiancées, and they would visit him in prison. The two prisoners, Jesse Anderson and Eugene Turner, were serving life sentences for murder. They were later charged with second-degree intentional homicide and were sentenced to 10 years in prison. Jeffrey Dahmer's death was ruled a homicide, meaning that it was caused by another person. However, it is unclear whether the killing was premeditated or whether it was just a crime of opportunity. However, these women were probably just using Jeffrey Dahmer for his notoriety. While in prison, Jeffrey Dahmer became an ordained minister. He was a highly intelligent individual who was able to get away with his crimes for so long. He was also a very charismatic person, which enabled him to fool everyone, including the police. If you want to learn more about Jeffrey Dahmer, we highly recommend that you check out the additional resources. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please subscribe to the channel. He converted to Christianity and began attending church services regularly. He also began writing letters to various religious organizations, asking for donations. However, the donations never came, and Jeffrey Dahmer continued to live in poverty. He was able to fool everyone, including the police, into thinking that he was a nice guy. However, there are a few theories that attempt to explain his behavior. One theory is that Jeffrey Dahmer suffered from a mental illness known as psychopathy. Psychopathy is a combination of personality traits that include antisocial behavior, callousness, and low levels of empathy and remorse. People who are psychopathic are often charming and manipulative, which enabled Jeffrey Dahmer to get close to his victims. Another theory is that Jeffrey Dahmer was a serial killer because he had a strong sexual drive. This sexual drive was so strong that he was willing to do anything to satisfy it, even kill and eat other humans. Finally, it is thought that Jeffrey Dahmer's behavior was influenced by his upbringing. He was born into a broken home, and his parents were always fighting. This may have caused him to become psychologically disturbed. It was during this time that he began killing again. Because his mother wanted to name him after her favorite celebrity, James Dean, he went from being a free man to being locked up in a prison cell. In prison, he was not allowed to have any personal belongings except for the clothes on his back. He was given a standard-issue toothbrush, toothpaste and soap, but he was not allowed to have anything else. He was not allowed to read books or magazines, and he was not allowed to watch TV. He spent most of his time alone in his cell, with the only company he had being the guards and the other prisoners. Although he was not allowed to have any possessions, Jeffrey Dahmer was still able to get his hands on some drugs. He developed a drug habit while in prison, and this caused him to become violent. On several occasions, he threatened other prisoners and even attempted to assault a guard. As a result, he was placed in solitary confinement for several months. He then ground the bones into powder and scattered them around the neighborhood. Again, the police never caught him. On July 1991, 14-year-old Tracy Edwards was walking home from a shopping mall when he was approached by Jeffrey Dahmer. This was because he confessed to eating the bodies of some of his victims. He claimed that he did this to feel closer to them. In addition to cannibalism, Jeffrey Dahmer was also a necrophiliac. He admitted to having sex with at least 10 of his victims after they died. He said that he was attracted to death and decay, and he also enjoyed the power that he felt when he was with dead bodies. Jeffrey Dahmer was also a taxidermist, which meant that he often had dead animals in his house. He would stuff the animals and then keep them as pets. He claimed that he did this because he liked the idea of keeping dead things alive. Dahmer was posing as a police officer and told Edwards that he was under arrest for loitering. He then handcuffed the boy and put him in his car. However, on the way to the station house, Edwards managed to escape from the car and run away. When Jeffrey Dahmer was found, he was charged with 15 counts of murder. He pleaded not guilty, but was convicted on all counts. He was sentenced to 15 life sentences plus 30 years. Over the next few years, Jeffrey Dahmer killed at least 17 more men. He would lure his victims to his home by posing as a police officer or using fake IDs. Once his victims were inside his home, he would either strangle them or beat them to death. He then engaged in sexual acts with the dead bodies, and even took Polaroid pictures of himself with the bodies. After that, he cut up the bodies and disposed of them. Some of the body parts he kept as souvenirs, while others he either buried in his backyard or threw them away. Even at a young age, Jeffrey Dahmer exhibited some odd behaviors. For example, he had an unusual fascination with death. He would often ask his mother why people died or what happened to them after they died. He also had a strange interest in animals, particularly in their bones and organs. He would dissect them and try to figure out how they worked. These unusual interests were not necessarily bad in themselves. After all, many scientists and doctors have similar interests. However, they became a problem when Jeffrey Dahmer began to act on them. Not only was he able to get away with his crimes for years, but he was also able to convince people that he was a successful businessman and a caring boyfriend, even though he was far from both of those things. So what made Jeffrey Dahmer so charming? What was it about him that made people trust him despite his evil nature? Let's find out in today's episode of You Wouldn't Hurt a Fly, only on this channel. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21st. When he was just 14 years old, Jeffrey Dahmer bludgeoned a man to death with a heavy object. The victim was a homeless man who was sleeping rough in an abandoned building. Jeffrey Dahmer had been watching the man for several days and had planned his attack carefully. He lured the man into a secluded area and then hit him over the head with a heavy object. He continued hitting the man until he was dead. Then he dismembered the body and disposed of it. The police never caught Jeffrey Dahmer for this crime, or for any of the crimes that followed. At the age of 18, Jeffrey Dahmer enlisted in the United States Army. In 1987, he strangled a young man to death and then boiled his body in acid. When Jeffrey Dahmer was finally caught, it was because one of his victims managed to escape. In prison, Jeffrey Dahmer became known as the Cannibal Killer. So why did Jeffrey Dahmer do what he did? One thing is for sure, Jeffrey Dahmer was a very intelligent individual. After being convicted, Jeffrey Dahmer's life changed drastically. Despite the hardships he faced, Jeffrey Dahmer still had some supporters on the outside. On November 28, 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer was beaten to death in the shower by two other prisoners. The motive for the killing was apparently just robbery. The case of Jeffrey Dahmer is a fascinating one.